there's going to be more terrible things because we're creating a culture that is not valuing queer and trans people and saying it's okay to not treat us with respect. And so that's going to create a culture of more violence and more refusal of care, which not only is so hurtful when people are refused care, but it causes them to have poor outcomes, and it puts their lives in danger when they can't access care. So.
Hi, my name is Augustine Colebrook, and I'm the principal at Midwifery Wisdom Collective. I speak on this podcast about big picture political issues and the future of our profession.
Hey y'all, I am Jamara, and I'm a midwife. I'm also a birth justice activist, and this season I am looking forward to sharing stories of Black midwives and the communities they serve.
Hello, beloved birth community. I'm Angela Love, nurse midwife since 2004, preceptor, and mother. I have a home birth practice called Midwife Love and a national telehealth practice called Midwife RX. My mission is to keep birth choices available and to educate the next generation of midwives for our daughters and grandchildren. Matriarchy now.
I'm Layla Wyatt. I get to share with you the voices of student midwives from across the country and beyond. This season, we focus on those students who just graduated, are about to sit for the NARM, or did yesterday, and we get tips and tricks for you for what happens at the end of the student midwife journey.
Welcome, beloved community. I'm so happy to be here today. Today is June 19th, which is a special day, Juneteenth, all over the country, celebrating the liberation of the enslaved peoples. And today we are doing a special podcast in honor of Pride Month, celebrating the queer community and queer midwives. So I'd like to introduce all of us. I'm going to start with myself, and then we can go around. Everyone can introduce themselves. I am Angie Love. I am a cisgendered woman. My pronouns are she, hers. I live in Florida on the land formerly of the Ais and Seminole land. And I come to this podcast in my queerness. I consider myself omnisexual. So I'm attracted to any and all genders. I'm very attracted to non-binary people. I have had long-term relationships with men, women, and trans people. I'm also polyamorous. I feel like I have the capacity to romantically love more than one person at a time. I love the queer community. I have since high school. Growing up in a very judgmental, fundamentalist religion, it was a breath of fresh air, the acceptance and non-judgment I have received from the community. So if we want to go around and y'all introduce yourselves.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Abby. I'll let you go first.
Okay. Hey, I'm Abby. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as non-binary and queer person. And I'm also a midwife and a parent. Yeah, and I guess that's it for now.
And I'm Jordan. I am a cisgendered woman. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a lesbian. And I am a new and becoming licensed midwife here in the state of Florida, here joining Midwife Love's team in Vero Beach.
Yay. Okay. So welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have y'all on the podcast and communicating with everyone across the country, the world that may want to know what it's like to be a queer midwife. So I thought we'd start from the beginning and just talk about your experience of being a queer midwife student or a queer college student. How were your professors and classmates? What was that experience like for you? You want to go first, Jordan, since you're the freshest?
Yeah, I've got the studentry freshest in my mind. Yeah, as far as professors and other students went, everything felt pretty accepting, pretty neutral. Our first year of school, we learned a lot about cultural competency, and we took a lot of deep dives into different conversations about, sexual identity and gender, and as well as racism and, deeply rooted pain within our society. Things got a little tense here and there. Some people finding that, struggles of queer people are, not as equal to their own struggle, or, lesser than. So some tough conversations would ensue in class here and there. But otherwise, everything felt very loving once we got to a certain wavelength with all of our sister midwives in the class. Our cohort became a lot like a family. And yeah, there was a lot of support there, and acceptance within my cohort specifically.
Beautiful. How about you, Abby?
Yeah, I started midwifery school in 2006 in Miami, and I was still discovering my gender and my sexuality at the time. I identified as genderqueer at the time, and I think bisexual, maybe queer at the time. I don't remember my wording exactly, but I definitely was started school as like with a androgynous haircut and like gender non-conforming presentation, I guess, which in that setting I experienced not a great reception from my main preceptor, and there was and my main preceptor was also had a lot of control over my path in school, because was also the head of the school. And so I experienced a lot of comments that I needed to change my presentation. I needed to grow my hair out. I looked like a dyke, I was told, and that no one wants a dyke as a midwife. It was very painful, and I was very young. I think I was probably 24 years old when I started school, so I wasn't fully in my power yet. And so it had a strong effect on me, for sure. And I really wanted to complete that program, and that was the school that was accessible to me financially. And so I definitely decided to change my presentation and grow my hair out and not talk about my queerness and during school especially with that preceptor. And yeah, so I guess that was my experience in school.
Oh, yeah. That particular preceptor was problematic in a lot of different areas. Also had her advantages as well, but I remember her distinctly telling me that I didn't know anything because I hadn't had a child yet, because I was young and didn't have a child, so I didn't know. I'd know one day, so those kind of comments are very discouraging, very much. So I went to school a long time ago. I've been a midwife now for 19 years. My first college experience was a religious school, Messiah College. And it had a community covenant of all the rules that you were having to follow, or else you could get kicked out. And one of them prohibited any kind of homosexual behavior. So most people were closeted at Messiah. And I had some professors that were cool and actually taught the Greek and the Hebrew languages in the Bible and how they really didn't define homosexuality as we know it today, so a lot of exploration of what the Bible actually says. I had this really awesome professor named Rita Finger who examined women in the Bible and taught me a lot. I started doing a lot of queer education for other people about these subjects my senior year and got in a little bit of trouble, and had to go to counseling on the evils of homosexuality my last semester, or get kicked out and have to start somewhere else. So I did. I sat there. I didn't buy any of it, but I had to sit there for an hour a week and listen to that. I also started a gay alumni page for that school after graduation that I feel like helped a lot of people at the time. It's no longer going on, but they do still prohibit that. They still have the same thing going on at Messiah up in Pennsylvania. And then I went to study to be a midwife at University of Miami. At that time, I was married to a man, so I could do a lot of masking of my queerness. I don't remember specifically negative comments about the queer community. I also don't remember a lot of positive awareness either. So just a lot of assumptions of heterosexuality and the language. But I do remember that there was a trans student in the nurse practitioner program that a lot of people gossiped about, which was really sad to me at the time. So I think that sums it up. There's a variety of schools, and a lot of that's going to depend on the policies of your school and also the preceptors that you land with. Unfortunately, there are limited preceptors in a lot of areas. So sometimes you take what you can get, and they might be problematic in many other ways. And so you're weighing, is it worth staying with this person, and what's going on there. So I thought we'd talk about maybe some of the advantages to being a queer midwife. I don't know if you guys have thought of any about bringing your queerness to your midwifery work and how that might be advantageous in some respects. Anyone?
Yeah.
Anyone?
I think when it comes to being advantageous in this field, it really depends on the client that you're working with. I think that's with most things midwifery. Some clients might hate your methods, other clients might love you until the end of time, just being who you are. So I think being a queer midwife can, kind of shed some light on the way others might be feeling, and attract certain clients that are queer themselves. And I imagine having practices that are ran by mostly or all queer midwives can help other queer couples come in and feel a nice breath of fresh air. I think that that's a nice pro, especially during our times right now, and the laws and bills being passed in our state specifically. It's good to have someone that you can relate to, that you feel safe around,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd love to add to that. Something that I love about being a queer midwife is just being able to, when you come and bring your authentic self and your true self, to what you're doing, you're going to come with so much, just be such a better midwife. And so and your joy is going to be a reflection of that. Yes. And something that's really cool now that I've practiced, since I started practicing back in 2009, and now a lot of the babies that I caught that I'm still in touch with their families, when they're reaching adolescence and starting to come out, that these kids start to come out as non-binary and trans and queer, as they're becoming teenagers, it's really exciting when their parents reach out to me, or when they tell their kids oh, your midwife was non-binary, or your midwife was queer. And let's talk to them about it. And so I've had like quite a handful of babies that I caught who I get to then talk to in puberty and just be like, you know, a positive role model in their lives. And so that's something I really love about being a queer midwife is that at least, you know, when, I don't know, when the babies grow up, then the families and they come out as queer or trans, that the families think of me, and then I get to reconnect with the kids. It's happened quite a few times, so it's very rewarding and an awesome thing about being a queer midwife.
That's beautiful. I love that.
That's special.
Yeah.
That.
I had someone in my family reach out this year for a supportive person, and luckily they, even though I'm not close to that side particularly, that they felt safe reaching out to me. I'm like, that's amazing, especially in my family. Yeah, so I do think that being queer in the queer community, a lot of times there's so much acceptance for wide varieties of partnerships, wide varieties of behavior. And so just that acceptance and that openness, I think, translates very well to all of our clients who have very different lives and arrangements, you know. And I think to be a good midwife, you are meeting people where they're at, and you're seeing what's important to them, you know, what are their values, what do they need, and it's very individualized care. And I think having that non-judgmental attitude, that openness, is amazing for them. You know, I've cared for people in polyamorous situations where, you know, I have 3 people in the room with me, and we're talking, this is their baby, and we're all talking about it, you know. So I think it definitely opens the doors, especially if you're out and about in your community, to people who might not feel loved elsewhere, you know. So all sorts of people come to midwifery for that loving feeling, right? We recently had someone come in our practice, and she was really, really sick, and she had pretty bad cancer, but she loved coming to our office and having Jordan draw her blood, because she got a little dose of love sitting on our couch that she wasn't getting with all the oncologists and the surgeons and all of that. So she was pretty much, you know, beyond our care, but she loved our blood draws, and she came back, can you guys please draw my blood? So I think that loving care like reaches out to everyone. Okay.
And you know, when you can't fully express yourself at work, you know, or in your workspace or within your career, you don't have that loving demeanor anymore. You can't talk about your life outside of work, and you're so compartmentalized between the two, that individualized care kind of goes out the window across the board. You know, you can't be an individual yourself, so how can you provide care in a way that's specialized for each of your clients? Yeah.
So what do you guys think maybe are some drawbacks or problems or challenges that queer midwives might face?
Well, homophobia.
Yeah.
Ditto. And I think that, you know, we all live in a state where there's plenty of that. We also, we live in a community, in a town that is very conservative. I don't know the true extent to all of the homophobia that's around here, but it might be, you know, I would say our town is not the most open and accepting, this little town that we live in down here. And so sometimes it does feel like, how out can I be? How gay can I be? Because I'm trying to balance, you know, I do want to be my authentic self, but also we are the only home birth practice in this whole county. So if we turn people off, People are going to be driving an hour to go see somebody. And my bottom line is going to go down, obviously, you know? So it's like, it's weighing the balance of what can I do here? And so I think that's changed as I've gotten more confident in myself and also more confident in my practice, that I'm out a little bit more to people that I think will handle it. You know, I wear my rainbow watch at work, you know, not all the time, but I would say probably good 80-90%. So, I mean, if people want to talk about it, we can. I'm definitely, you know, not trying to push it on people, but I think that this, depending on where you live, if there's a lot of homophobia, that could be more of an issue. What do y'all want to add?
I think that you're spot on about who can you be, who can you come out to, you know? I think that's been a little tricky to find balance in. There are a lot of clients where you would assume, you know, knowing just their superficial selves when they first walk in the door, that they might not be okay with who you are. And then other clients that you think would, and they might not be. And so I usually find myself using more of like the neutral language, referring to my partner instead of my girlfriend. Sometimes even until we're 2 days into their labor, to come out to some of my clients, just for the sake of safety for me. And, you know, sometimes maybe it is a people pleasing trait, not wanting to make other people feel uncomfortable because I'm queer. So that can be a little tricky to balance. Yeah, there can be a lot of that. You know, sometimes it's not until you see a particular person's Facebook posts later on in the year that you even realize that they might have had those views that you were so open to share. And, you know, you kind of double back and say, oh, wow, maybe I shouldn't have disclosed that or said that, or, you know, talked about the lovely weekend trip I had, you know, with my partner. So that can be a bit of a challenge.
I definitely had, well, you know, I definitely masked my queerness in school and then came into it slowly when I started practicing, to be out to my clients. And I didn't come out to all my clients. I had a very, well, that stayed with me, that comment from my preceptor that nobody wants a dyke as a midwife. It stayed with me for a long time. And so, yeah, I often didn't come out to clients. And I also felt like, you know, their care is about them, right? And I don't need to talk about my personal life very much when I'm taking care of them and their pregnancy. And I did have an experience that was painful, and it was also really transformative because I had a client who I'd taken care of for her first baby, and she came to me again with her second baby. And I worked at a birth center with the first baby, and then the second baby I was doing home birth practice. And so I was working with different midwives, but I was more out then, a couple years later, than I had been when I worked at the birth center. And I was back to like presenting how I like to dress and how I like to have my hair and all that. Like, it took me a few years after school to feel safe to get back into it, because I felt really hesitant about being myself and being a midwife. So that client was excited to see me again, and was excited for me to be her midwife. I did her first visit, and then she friended me on Facebook, which I, you know, am more careful about now. But back then I was like, oh, friends with clients, sure. And then she, you know, saw something about my gender identity there and came to the other midwives in my practice and said that she didn't want me to be her midwife because I was trans. Like she didn't, she wanted to see the other midwives and not me anymore. And yeah, it was like very sad to me to experience that. And the midwives that I worked with, it was a real healing experience because the midwives that I worked with were like, oh, okay, like, sorry you feel that way. Abby is part of our practice. And when you know, if Abby's on call, Abby's the midwife who comes. And so if you don't want Abby at your birth, then we're not the practice for you. And they were very just like, you know, not taking it. And that felt really healing for me and affirming, because of just my fear that other midwives wouldn't want to practice with me and that I would lose clients and I would bring down the practice, like all the internalized fears that I took in from being in a homophobic environment, and society, so and transphobic.
Yes, you were with some good midwives at the time. That's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a need.
Yeah, so advertising in the community. How do y'all, have you thought about it? Advertising to the queer community that we're here to serve them. I myself try to be active in the local queer communities that I find online. There is a queer medical group, like a directory that you can list your practice in. Any other ideas that y'all have or have done?
I like reposting on social media, you know, queer couples, trans couples, trans parents, you know, just kind of putting the word out there, letting people know that I'm here and I'm in support, and, you know, posting pictures of my partner and I on social media. Just kind of, without having to, I guess, ruffle feathers on social media, or cause a rise out of, you know, certain people in my friends groups or family groups. Just kind of letting people know without having to say it that I'm here and supporting and a safe place.
How about you, Abby? Did you guys do any specific advertising to the queer community?
Yeah. Well, something that comes to mind is so I think it was back in 2012. I started providing like intrauterine inseminations to the community, and at that time, before gay marriage was legal in Florida, all the providers in this area required people to be married to get conception services, and to access in vitro and IUI. And so that's what kind of motivated me to be trained in IUI. And I went to California and got trained and did an internship there and came back and started providing services. And so I did kind of raise awareness about my midwifery practice through that. And I did fertility and conception classes at the Pride Center and kind of advertised that way. I gave free classes about how to plan, how to track fertility and the different ways to support getting pregnant, and then people found out, and I advertised for the home birth services there too. So it's like that was one thing that we did, and then people knowing me as being a provider that way, that they became aware because I did at home IUIs. And so, yeah, kind of people learned about home birth that way too.
Mhm. Yes. I've done a couple at-home IUIs too and love them, love meeting people in their place. And I think that home birth is really such an amazing place to give birth if that's an option for people. And for people who face discrimination, it's even better for them to feel comfortable in their own home and to be, surrounded by providers they know and they trust. I think that is very, very helpful to people in our community. Any other ideas you have, Jordan?
Lots of different events that you could go to. I mean, being that I'm a new and becoming midwife, it's kind of been a little bit of a learning curve for me to figure out what local resources we have within our community. I've been learning a lot from in our practice, and seeing what we have around. So social media has kind of been the main tool in my eyes, just because it reaches more people. I think that's been a little bit of a challenge within our practice at times too. We really don't get a lot of queer clients. I am curious to see how in the future we can improve that,
Mhm.
do they not know that we're here, or are they just, comfortable with where they are? I don't know. I actually haven't even seen a wide variety of providers in our area myself to know who is safe, like primary care physicians, and so I'm curious to see what we can do and how we can grow in that area.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I know that everyone talks about providing inclusive care to everybody. And so I was going to say, how do we do that? What are the principles? What are the things that we do to help ourselves be welcoming?
One of them is sharing our pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
Asking open questions, having a more comprehensive list of intake forms, how can we really open up the platform from the get, before they even walk into our office? How can we open ourselves up to say, hey, we're safe here,
Mm-hmm.
Sharing about our personal lives is a big one. Again, with that tricky balance of whether or not you'll be accepted. Abby's story was pretty inspiring there. Knowing that even when you are out, when you do come out, as a feminine presenting lesbian, looking at me, it's not quite something that you can't really tell that I'm queer when you're just looking at me in the street, unless I'm standing next to my girlfriend. And even that sometimes, they will refer to her as my son. So yeah, there's that tricky part, but the more open you are, and inviting you are, the more you share about yourself to others, and your clients can be a welcoming aspect as well within your practice.
Any tips that you want to share, Abby?
Yeah, I think it's everything Jordan said. It's not assuming that that everyone that we see who's pregnant is going to identify as a mother or a mama. just like asking what parent words people like to use for themselves, not assuming that someone has a partner at all, or not assuming that they have just one partner, or that they, just not assuming anything about anyone, and not setting up, the expectation of heteronormativity and monogamy and all of that. And yeah, I think also it's important to talk, since this is maybe slightly different tangent, but to also show that we are, safe people, or that we're safer spaces for intersex people also. And talking to our parents about, because as midwives, we're the first, the first provider who has eyes on the baby. And, like, being inclusive also means talking about, hey, not all babies are easily defined as male and female, and talking about intersex variations, with our parents prenatally in childbirth class. And that way, people who are intersex, or people whose partners are intersex, will also feel safer to know that that is something that we talk about, and that, and that we're also going to be an advocate for the babies who don't fit easily into the boxes, both when they're born and also as they grow up, and that we're resources in our communities by being open about all of those things. So that's some things that come to mind.
Good points. Yeah. Yeah, this came up in my office maybe a week or two ago. There was a woman, a client of mine, who was really sad that she was not having another boy, that she knows of. She just, found out what we think are the genitals of the baby. And so she was disappointed. And her two sons were there, and they were disappointed. And the husband, the whole family, was disappointed. I myself was sad that they were all experiencing this disappointment, because, I love women so much. And I'm like, this is such a great blessing. I was so happy to have my, girls. And anyway, we were talking about that, and it was just like, even talking to the little boys, well, they're like, we want a boy. We want someone who can be tough and play with us. I'm like, there's plenty of girls who play, they're just going to play with dolls. I'm like, you have no idea how this baby is going to be and how they're going to interact with you or anything. This is a baby that's new and coming out. We have no idea. So like, so many like genders, roles, and it's really hard, because it's like, I want to present information, but I don't want to be a jerk. But these people get really into like their gender reveal parties, and it's a whole industry of making money and all this stuff. And it's just like, you may know if there appears to be a penis or a vulva, but you don't know much more beyond that. And sometimes I'll slip a little comment in there, like if someone is saying they're really disappointed with, well, maybe they'll be trans, so I give them hope. Probably not the hope they were looking for, but it's like weighing the pendulum. Well, you really don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that midwives just are witness so many conversations around assigning sex to the baby. It's just so deep in our culture for that to be like such a big question during pregnancy, and then for the pregnancy, if it's discovered in the pregnancy what the genitals of the baby are, or now the chromosomes of the baby, since some families are able to check that. Then it's just the direction of the pregnancy. It's just like, now we know what clothes to buy, and now we know how to decorate the room. And it's hard as a trans person, as a non-binary person, to, be immersed in that. That was definitely a challenge of mine, while I was practicing. I'm on a break from practicing now, but just something. And I always tried to plant seeds of the same thing that you were talking about, Angie. Just like, well, we don't know what they're gonna like, we don't know what colors they're gonna enjoy yet, and we don't know what their interests are going to be based on their chromosomes or their genitals. But it's tiring too. It's to be in that role of educating always, and then also have, so that's just a challenge that I didn't talk about earlier, but it definitely it's a great opportunity because I love educating, but then it also can be draining because it's so immersed in our culture to have an obsession about the baby's gender.
Especially when you try to have conversations about non-binary people and trans people and, breaking away from the gender roles, you're met with, what do you mean? You're met with a whole lot of shock from most people. I've found as soon as you start bringing up it really, it really gets deep into their mind space. It's almost like that emoji of the brain exploding.
Yeah, definitely depends on and the community that you're at. We would be having different conversations if we were practicing out in Portland, where we ourselves are in rural Florida in a Republican area, I think obviously we all think about language that we could be using to make things more inclusive. And I think that's like a little sign. People that are in the queer community will probably pick up on it, and then some people won't pick up on it. So I think that's like a very easy way for you to talk to people, like when you're saying, oh, the birthing person or the birthing people or people that have a uterus, people that have a vulva. I was teaching sex ed for teenagers here recently in my town. And so a lot of times we would use that kind of language. And it was interesting, the people that actually came to this class. Now in my county, in the sex ed in schools, all they teach is abstinence only. That's all they teach. So I was teaching the sex ed outside of the school system. And we had a lot of kids in there that were either non-binary or trans. They haven't fully decided, but it was about half the class. And I think that was just some parent knew that it was going to be a safe class and we need to get them in. And, so using inclusive language so that everyone is feeling comfortable and welcome and like they have a place. And it was interesting because the curriculum we were using is a great curriculum, but it hasn't been edited in maybe 10, 15 years. And so they still had a lot of activities like boys go to this side of the room and girls go to this side of the room. And I'm like, well, we can't do that. We're not going to be doing that. But we could break it down the class or whatever. So it was very interesting to teach this young community because many times the younger ones have more of an idea of all of this inclusivity than the older folks. Our teenage moms that are coming to us are probably more clued in than our 35-year-old moms or our 40-year-old moms that are older. Mm-hmm. So I think partner's the big one, not assuming they have a partner, not assuming it's a husband. And like some of the even the groups that they teach locally, they have this doula dads program where they're really emphasizing the partner as the doula, and doula dads is catchy. What if it's not a dad, and what if the partner wants to take it, like I get that we want to be catchy and trendy, but like we also have to be welcoming, and doula dads is not a welcoming title.
Yeah.
Or if it's their sister that's going to be with them, it's a very heteronormative title. No offense, Healthy Start. You could change the name. Anything else y'all want to say about that?
Thank you for reminding me about just all the language that we use. So yeah, I think it's really helpful to check in with our clients about the language they want used for their body parts also. And so especially with transmasculine and non-binary pregnant people, it can be really non-affirming for when we're talking about birth to talk about using, the medical terms that we usually use for vagina and vulva and all of that if someone doesn't identify those words with their parts. And so it's a great thing before we do a pelvic exam, like before we talk about the parts, just be like, what language do you want me to use for your body if I need to talk about your body parts? And that's something that can really help people feel affirmed, because even cisgender women may have words that they don't like for their body too. So it's a great question to ask everybody.
Good point. Yes.
Yeah, I remember it being in school, and we were learning a lot about competency and inclusivity, and there was someone within the class, and it stuck with me for a while, where they were talking about how someone did a pap smear on them, a care provider, and they found the cervix. And they were like referring to the cervix as a girl, just saying, oh, look at her, she's so pretty, talking about the cervix in such a feminine way. And this particular person did not like feminine terms used for her body parts, especially for parts that, are organs. Why are we putting gender on so many things? So avoiding language like that, and trying to keep language like pretty and beautiful and, all of these gender specific terms for appearance out of our conversations too would be helpful. Yeah, we don't need handsome and beautiful and pretty to be ways that we describe things, especially in the medical field.
Agree. Yeah, so I guess the challenges in today's environment for providing queer and trans care, I would say there's never been more challenges than this year, 2023, that we currently find ourselves in this government run by DeSantis here in Florida, who keeps cranking out laws that are full of hate. And it's hate against gay people, trans people, women. There's been a lot of hate that have been coming out and taking rights away from people and access to medical care. So this year, trans care changed in regard to providing care to minors and basically banning all of that, and also requiring that trans adult care be in person and be with an MD when they're transitioning, and providing criminal penalties for people who don't go along with that. So I, am totally against that. And I think that's horrible. And I was thinking, how can we get around these laws, for people who are not leaving the state, because there are plenty that are leaving the state, but how can we get around these laws? And I think that one of the things that midwives we do well is we don't require pelvic exams. Everyone can decline pelvic exams as they see fit. I was talking to a trans person in my community, and they're like, I really need to get this depot shot, but now I don't know where to get it. And I'm like, well, you can come see me. I don't need to inspect your genitals. So I provide depot all of the time. So I think there are ways around it, but it's really disgusting that we have to even think like this, What are some challenges that you guys have seen?
I find it to be quite terrifying. The other new bill that was proposed and I believe passed that had to do with providers being able to decline care for people based on their own religious, personal, moral beliefs. Terrifying. In a more personal matter, you know, as a midwife that is queer and accepting of anyone, obviously that won't be me, a part of that umbrella bill. I'm not going to be declining care to anyone, period. But scary knowing that, you know, someone that looks the way that my girlfriend does, would she be declined care? How hurtful that would be. You know, putting into your intake forms, how can we, you know, create a safe space and, you know, ask all of these personal questions about gender identity and sexual orientation, if we have this stipulation now where if you disclose it, you could be declined care. You know, how can we make this safe? We can't, you know, unless you're adding in things like your social media presence and, you know, like you said, adding in your practice names and going out there and advertising yourself as someone that is safe. I find that to be a massive barrier to care and adequate care. You know, trans people and queer people are already less likely to seek care from a primary care physician. They are disproportionately more likely to have morbidities because of this. So yeah, that's been a big disturber for me, is that part. That law specifically.
Abby, you got a lot to say. I can feel it.
Oh gosh. Yeah. There's so much, and because there's so many aspects to the bills that just passed. And I did recently attend like a Q&A that the Pride Center in my area was doing to kind of like explain the bills a little more in depth, and that was helpful. One thing that I understand from that, and hopefully I'm right about this, but what I understand is that for the gender affirming care ban, the SB 254 that passed, what I understand is that it's requiring adults who are seeking gender affirming care to have in-person visits for the first visit, but then telehealth visits can happen after that.
Okay.
That's what they clarified, like the lawyer who was there clarified. So hopefully that's correct, but it would be telehealth with someone out of state, right? Like unless you have a doctor, you know, it did ban nurse practitioners from, you know, doing care, which is what they presented. 80% of trans people get their gender affirming care from nurse practitioners. And so it's really a barrier to care. But there are, you know, the queer community is resilient and trans community is resilient. And so there's people working to like find ways around these laws. And there is that requirement of the first visit has to be in person. The Pride Center in my area is bringing a doctor to town who's going to do people's initial visits and then set them up with telehealth. So I know that there's a few like telehealth, I'll just mention resources like Queer Med, where you can people in Florida can get access to care telehealth as long as they had their initial visit in person. They can then do their follow-up visits through Queer Med with like physicians, or maybe, I guess physicians out of state. Or so anyway, and there's another one called Plume, I think. So I just wanted to mention that for people listening, because that seems like important to know that, these laws are terrifying, and we are part of a really resilient community that's going to find ways around these as much as we can. But it is going to do a lot of damage, and it's going to create a more of a culture that's not safe for trans people, for queer people, especially for people who are also queer, trans, and BIPOC. There's going to be so many more deaths of Black trans women, than there is even now. There's going to be more, there's going to be more terrible things because we're creating a culture that is not valuing queer and trans people and saying it's okay to not treat us with respect. And so that's going to create a culture of more violence and more refusal of care, which not only is so hurtful when people are refused care, but it causes them to have poor outcomes, and it puts their lives in danger when they can't access care. So that's
Thank
part
you
of
for
what I was
that.
saying.
That's good. Yes. Did they give you any shortcuts or backdoors for youth, trans youth?
Right. So, well, all I know is that kids that are already in care are already receiving gender affirming care, are grandfathered in, that they're not going to be stopped from their medications. But that's all I can share at this moment. But I'm hopefully right, because for queer, let me pause for a second. Because I took some notes. Let me see if I wrote anything about that.
Okay, yes. And I think we have to, share these, backdoors and workarounds. And those things have been going around for the, abortion issue as well. There's a great website for that called Plan C, and it'll take you to whatever state you're in, what are the current laws regarding abortion, and if you want medication abortion in that state, how you can get it. And they have interesting sites where they're from overseas pharmacies that will ship you the pills, or they're from another provider in another state who will ship them to a mailbox that you rented in California. So there's different ways around of getting things that you need. Unfortunately, not everybody's going to know about these ways. Lots of people are going to be left out.
Yeah, so I don't know about for kids. I know that it is felony for physicians to provide gender affirming care to minors, and I don't know of a workaround that.
Yeah, I can tell you, once again, that kids also don't need a pelvic exam. And nurse midwives, we expanded our scope of practice a couple years ago to include all gender identities, I was part of that committee, and I was so happy for that. I worked on the scope of practice specifically to get that changed.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so all gender identities are welcome to be seen by nurse midwives, and pelvic exams aren't really required, and pap smears aren't required to age 21. And so lots of things can be done, for any gender identity. So if you have a friendly and helpful nurse midwife. And
it's interesting, like it specifically is for gender affirming care. Of course, a lot of medications are available for kids for other reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
you just have to find the reason that's not called gender affirming care, whether it's testosterone and I have really low libido and I really need that testosterone, or I'm taking Depo so I don't get pregnant, or whatever it is, the excuse that you need to give, there are workarounds. Yeah, so I am reading this amazing book everybody should read. It's called The Tragedy of Heterosexuality.
I haven't heard of it. Who's it by?
It's by Jane Ward. It's so amazing. I love it. So I have got some quotes from this that I'm going to share, and it might encourage you to read it. And instead of considering, like, straight people considering themselves allies to the queer community, we queers should really consider ourselves allies to the straight community, because they're going through a tough time. And they need to be blessed by friendships with us and relationships and all the love that we have, to help them along to get out of their tragedy. So here's a great one. It says, homophobia is the outward expression of heterosexual misery, a kind of subconscious jealous rage against the gendered and sexual possibilities that lie beyond the violence and disappointments of straight culture. That's a good one. I like that one. Being straight was largely beneficial for men. The same was not always true for women, for whom the institution of heterosexuality has been a site of violence, control, diminishment, and disappointment. Let's see what else I got here. Straight people have few opportunities to grieve the disappointments of straight culture, the bad and coercive sex, the normalized inequities of daily life, straight men's fragility and egomania, straight women's growing disillusionment with men's fragility and egomania, the failed marriages, the co-parenting that is really solo parenting. Because how does one speak about the failure of the very system that defines people's success? Two more. Okay. Quite sad that in a straight culture, a vagina is evaluated according to its capacity to please men and not its capacity to experience pleasure. We deal with a lot of this in our profession of, how's my vagina going to be after I give birth? Oh, my husband says it's different, or whatever, dealing with all of that versus, well, what are you feeling? What is your pleasure like? I've dealt with, straight women who are 40 years old and plus who have never had an orgasm. They've had many kids, they've had a long marriage and never had an orgasm. And the final one I want to share with is the late queer theorist Jose Esteban Munoz defined queerness not as a sexual orientation per se, but as a utopian longing, a feeling of being pulled toward a queerer future as yet unimagined. Any thoughts, comments?
I love it. Final little comment from me, for any new midwives, student midwives, midwives out there that are, not quite sure where they stand in their community and their practice. Surround yourself professionally with people that will have your back. Listen to Abby's story. Listen to who you should really surround yourself with. Your team should be just as supportive and just as much of an ally as you would be to anybody else that you love. Be yourself, be gay, and don't worry about all of those preceptors, clients, people that you're going to come around. People are not always going to think of you as their cup of tea, and that's okay, because you have people that love you.
Yes. They say there's a shoe
said.
for every foot, right? Yeah. Any other final thoughts from you, Abby?
Yeah, I'll say something. I really loved what you said, Jordan. I'll say something to the other queer midwives out there, queer and trans midwives out there, and especially in Florida, but all over. Um, yeah, I know that, especially with our current political climate, we, are often told like that we shouldn't exist, or that we don't even exist, right? That non-binary people don't even exist in a lot of people's minds. Um, So just wanted to say to all those out there that yes, we do exist and we bring beauty to the world for existing, right? And we bring, so much magic to the world for being ourselves. And so we should be respected and celebrated as all people should be. And yeah, definitely what Jordan said about finding a supportive people to practice with. And yeah, it's okay if you're not going to be if a client is so judgmental that they don't want you to be their midwife, that's okay. They can find another midwife, right? And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be yourself.
Yes. Yes. So I want to say happy Pride Month to everyone out there listening. And I know we need a ton more midwives. We need a ton more queer midwives. We need a ton more trans midwives. So schools are open. Preceptors are here. And come join us. Become a midwife. We can use you. There's a lot of work to be done.